Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio inside Mac 6 Conscious Workspace and Conscious Capitalism Arizona headquarters, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm your host and Phoenix Business Radio studio owner, Karen Nowicki, and I am very excited to welcome two dear friends back to the studio. We are learning so much about each other and about our culture, in addition to some of the systemic changes that need to take place. Please welcome back to the studio with me, Camilla Ross, who is with Emerson Theater Collaborative, and Karen Loomis with No Mas Brands. Welcome, ladies.
Hello. Good morning.
We are on the fourth in this series, aren't we? This is number 4?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's so exciting, you guys.
It really is. And we set out to, when Karen reached out and said, can we do this? Can we have a conversation on Business RadioX around racism in small business and the arts? And I said, of course, what should that look like? And we started off with one show. The three of us came back together afterwards and did kind of a debrief. And we're left in awe of how much more needs to be said and maybe perhaps even the role that we could play in helping educate others. And so it's become this beautiful series. And our goal is to bring the right people and the right balance to have a delicate conversation surrounding racism in small business and the arts. And every show provides the perspectives of both sides of the color spectrum. This is a place the comfortable come to be uncomfortable through the expansion of one's perspective. And we hope you'll continue to join us. And for those of us joining us for the first time, take time to go back and listen to the first 3 segments. Today's focus is going to be around personal bias and its impact, and to help us further that conversation and really, I think, help us go in a little bit deeper for ourselves, although I know the 3 of us are pretty deep individuals, but we can always learn and be expanded ourselves. We're inviting to the panel and the conversation today, Dr. Dorothy A. Martin-Neville. And Dorothy, holy cow, I can't wait for our learners and our listeners to have an opportunity to get to know you. So first of all, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thanks. I'm really looking forward to it.
And with that, before we jump in, would you give us, just kind of that summary? I know it's been a long career, but share a little bit about who you are and from your perspective, why you think Camilla and Karen thought we would want to have you in this conversation with us today. And it's your opportunity to shine and brag, so go for it.
Well, Camilla knows me, so she knows I'm not very shy or quiet. And controversial, that's been my lifestyle. So I'm just always ready to jump in. There's nothing I won't discuss on some level. And what I do is many things. I've lived in other countries. I'm here living in the States now. And it's been a blessing. I was a therapist for many years, and now I'm an executive leadership coach. And I think, and a speaker, I'm past president of the National Speakers Association here in Connecticut. And I think anybody that's out there working with people has got to be really well advanced themselves in their ability to work with all people from all nationalities, all countries, all races, all religions, and really appreciate the gift that each one of us is to the other, and really enjoy the journey. I love people. So it's just a great place to start.
Oh, okay. Now we know. And Camilla, you were the one who said to Karen and I, we ought to have an introduction to Dorothy. Tell us from your perspective, what was so joyous about, first of all, her saying yes, but the invitation to begin with.
Dorothy is just, she is a powerhouse of a woman. I'm going to tell you, her story is amazing. Her heart is large, and just she gives so much of herself to so many people and does it unconditionally and willingly and just enjoys what she does. She enjoys life, and she has this way of speaking to people that makes you feel like you're the most important person in that moment that she's talking with you. But her skill set and her knowledge of life and what she's been through is so extraordinary. And so I think what she has to say to people is so important. And so I'm just glad she's here.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Karen, you and Dorothy had not met until a pre-call or LinkedIn connection. Am I right? Or
yeah, I was totally warm introduced by Camila and also by our previous guest, Annie Garland. And so, I trust the people in the circle around me that when they say there's somebody you need to meet, I believe that. And I reach out and we had a fabulous conversation. And as a matter of fact, during our pre-show earlier this week, just the conversation about our everyday life, she gave me chills when she responded in a way that, as business leaders, we're kind of tough and we just go on, but our bodies tell us otherwise. And so I think that that's the kind of insight that you're going to get from Dr. Dorothy. And not only is she going to be available on this show, she also has an Ask Dr. Dorothy. So you can go to her Facebook page and ask her some questions and get some more information that you may have after the show is over. Here's what I want to kind of lay the foundation. I know a lot of people are saying, well, why do you keep bringing these white people on? And here's why. You people don't listen to us as African Americans. And so we bring people on to provide some credibility and insight into what goes on in the human mind when it comes to things as simple as bias, discrimination, racism, et cetera, that all of us have as a lens that defines our behaviors if we are not taking the appropriate steps to watch. And so just to kind of go into that a little bit, when we were starting to talk about bias in general, the minute somebody tells me they don't have bias, I know they immediately are not being truthful. And we all have bias that dictates everything that goes on in our life. If, like I said, if we're not taking the chance to stop it. And a lot of that just comes from awareness. And the only way you're going to learn is by, self-help books or, having somebody as wonderful as Dr. Dorothy here to kind of help guide us through some of our biases so that we have an understanding.
Absolutely, Karen, because you know how they say, I'm glad you said, because they say Black folks are dishonest. What a biased statement. So we have
Hopefully.
Dr. Dorothy here to just give it some validity. You know what I'm saying? So that's where I'm coming from on that one.
Yeah. It amazes me that when people say, I have no bias, we start with the fact that they also have very little self-awareness. All right. Emotional intelligence, and I believe we're all called to develop as much emotional intelligence as we're capable of. And as long as we're on this journey, we should keep developing it more and more. When you have that awareness, there's this belief that if I tell you I have a bias, it means I'm not good enough. It means I'm less than. And the fact is, having a bias isn't good or bad. We have biases. I grew up in a very strong Irish Catholic neighborhood in the housing projects of South Boston. And the bias I was raised with was the Irish people have fantastic sense of humor. Every one of us is in our genes. So when I meet Irish people, my first thought is, I wonder what their humor's like. Well, there are some Irish people out there without an ounce of humor in their entire body.
I think I dated one.
So let's do some reality checks. But that's a bias. It's not against anybody, but it's still a bias. So let's just look at this. And I love hot, spicy foods. I was very involved in West African politics for a few years ago. And when you walk in the African community, hot spices are a pretty normal part of life. And I lived in the Caribbean. Hot spices is a normal part of life. My bias is towards spicier foods rather than bland foods. Not good or bad. It's nothing against anybody, but it's a bias. If I can get something that's nice, hot, and spicy, or mashed cauliflower, I know where I'm going. So just own it, that we all have biases, period, and let it go. Now, but today, something like today is, let's look at what biases do we have that are destructive to us, or destructive to our relationships, or destructive to the development of us as human beings on this planet. Because those biases limit who we are and who we can become, and they limit our ability to be in intimate relationships with others.
I also wanted to add that depending on your occupation, that if you're not aware of your own bias, it becomes part of what you do. And I think that is part of the self-awareness fact that we were talking about. But if we were to translate it to what's happening in the African-American community right now with policing and crime, there's a lot of data and research out there that is proving that this idea that African Americans are much more impacted by policing, negative policing, harassing policing, violent policing than any other community in our nation. But yet we still are having to argue the point that it actually exists. So what we have to think about is that as humans, everybody has a bias, as we keep saying, including police officers. And this includes white police officers, Hispanic police officers, Black police officers. And the part that we forget sometimes is that your bias isn't permanent. It changes over time. So for people in these kinds of occupations where their bias determines their reaction, we have to really be concerned about how much self-awareness do those individuals in those roles have, so that we can start to even address some of the issues that we have with bias when it comes to policing in the African-American world.
Education is key, in that development. And I think, they're talking about education right now for law enforcement. And I think it's real important from the time that they go into the academy is to getting that information and getting that education and processing that and going through scenarios to help them do their job better. It's really important that we look at the biases that we have. And I'm going to say it, fix your stuff.
I've heard you say that before.
Just maybe once or twice.
Black folks have biases too. I have my biases, but I fix my stuff. Okay. And it's okay to have them, but be aware that you have it. But to be in denial that you don't, that is the problem.
Well, to me, that's where a lot of confusion comes in. And what is a belief system? And what is a bias? And what is reality? All right. You've got people there that are still, and we're not doing any names here, but we've got people out there that still believe Black people are less intelligent than white people. That's not a bias. That's fact. That's just what is. And so I just accept reality. Okay, so let's take a look at that again. Tell me where those facts were proven. Tell me where that belief system started. Tell me no, I don't have to because it's fact, which is basically saying I have a belief system. I don't want to acknowledge its bias. I want to accept it as fact, and you can't challenge my view of the facts. And unless we are willing to grow enough to say, maybe a belief system I have is not based on fact. Maybe it's based on somebody else's bias that I learned early.
Yeah.
And if I'm willing to deal with facts, I will be willing to see what's right in front of me. Because remember, when we create a filter, we only see what it is we choose to see. We only see through that filter. So we've got to own we have a filter, and it's based on biases we may not even be conscious that we have.
I want to pause here just to add this piece, and I think I sent it to both Karen and Camilla, but I don't recall if I did, and I have not thoroughly researched this yet, but there was an article recently about the SAT, and the research that I was not aware of that was pointing out what Dr. Dorothy just said, that it was intentional to prove that white man was smarter than Black man.
Right.
And I had no idea. I mean, that's such a part of our higher education entry. But I point that out because it's a perfect example of what you're talking about. That and this the whole reason why Camilla and Karen have been advocates for this ongoing conversation. It's the system in which our country has been founded upon, that there are many pockets like this that I would have never known that's where the SAT came from and how it was developed. And how do we continue to allow that to be a big part of how our students are entering the universities?
or not entering universities
Or
because
not.
they didn't do
or
well.
not. Yes.
All
Well,
right.
go ahead.
And this coronavirus has showed us another bias that's in there, and that now we've got these kids studying at home.
Yeah.
And the awareness that the kids with some amount of money, more often not white kids with some amount of money, have the best computers to do the best research for their homework. Whereas now they're finding so many of these kids in studying at home not only don't have computers, don't have Wi-Fi, don't know how to use any of it because nobody has ever had them exposed to all of that. And so therefore they're not doing as well. Is it because of a lack of intelligence, or is it a lack of ability to have the tools necessary that other kids have? And how do you compete when somebody's got all the tools in the world and you've got none? This isn't about implicit knowledge.
Yeah, it's resources. I mean, if you're allocating resources to the rich white communities and you're not allocating the proper resources to the other communities, it shows. The data is there, and it's all about the numbers. And I'm going to go with Karen because Karen is all about the numbers. If you look at the numbers, that's the truth. We can go back to, let's go back to the 1800s, okay, where the Republican Party and things of that sort, our people were inventors. They're still inventors, and a lot of the inventions were invented by African Americans. So that theory of us being non-intelligent is ridiculous.
I agree completely. And which is why now, unfortunately, however, we're still, and we've known this for a couple decades in the sense of it's really out there. So let's wake up quickly. And so now we just have the month of February where every day it's posted publicly, this great inventor of something that we never thought, a Black person could have done that. Or let's look at our space program. Let's look at whatever, because we're talking Black and we're talking Black women. So there's these two pieces, if you will, to put in here. All right. But looking at, we spend 1 month and every single day have at least one or two inventors or real geniuses that have accomplished something. Why is that stuff not in our school books?
Yes.
Why is that not in the full presentation of history? And with that, then destroying some of these biases that children are taught at a very early age, they learn the facts that contradict the bias. They learned at home, but if they're never exposed to the facts, they grow up with a bias that's never been challenged. And then they become adults out in the real world. And it's like, oh my goodness, what are those people? They all think incorrectly. I think correctly. Oh, really?
There's a piece of data that when I was in Spokane on vacation a couple weeks ago, it just so happened that my mother likes to cut out newspaper clippings and send them in the mail to me. She's not technologically advanced. So when I surprised her with my arrival, she happened to have saved in Spokane's newspaper, they did a whole entire thing on diversity and racism. And the numbers are staggering. And one of the numbers, I'm going to try to share it with you with my, put my glasses on, that is relevant to what we're kind of talking about is for one Black, let me preface this by saying that Washington State overall African Americans, it's a 2.5%. So when you think about bias, how easy bias is to be formed when you're a child, when you grow up in a community that there's only 2.5 or 2% African Americans, you're just not exposed to that. So relative to talking about resources, this states that in Washington State, for one Black or Hispanic child that drops out of school for every 2 who graduate. Wow. So let me read it again. One Black or Hispanic child drops out of school for every 2 who graduate. This one hits me directly square in my mouth that needs to be quiet at times. But a Black college graduate like myself and Camila has the same chance of being unemployed as does a white high school dropout.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that gives me chills and at the same time evokes every bit of mama bear in me to where I just want to destroy the world because it's like, how is this possible? I have 9 years of higher education, but yet I have the same chance of being unemployed as a white high school dropout. Put that in perspective.
What does that say about business?
Everything.
Yeah.
Who's leading?
Yes. It says everything about leadership.
I'm going to say that. Who's leading that business? Because I'll tell you what, we're in this time of change right now. And so when businesses are actually looking for truth and change, look at your upper echelon, look at your top boards. What is the makeup of those boards? I can guarantee you there's more white males on those boards than there are Black folks.
Or even women.
Or even women. Exactly where I'm going. So that's a behavior that needs to change. And biases continue to feel and feed that upper echelon.
And I think that we're seeing that as a country right now with the lack of leadership and what it has done. And, and I've shared some stories about a leadership event, a thing that happened to me in Spokane, as I've said, that racism never takes a vacation. And it didn't take a vacation when I was on vacation either. It just followed me along from the beginning. But one of the things that happened, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the story because it'll take me 23 minutes. But long story short, we had an incident where my dog upset the table that we were eating at outside, and a normal server would have just done what everybody would have expected, would have been just to clean it up, and we move to a different table and we move on, especially since we're the only ones in the restaurant. But that's not what happened. We were actually denied service after that. And so, of course, I'm angry as hell, because that's what I do. And so I went on Yelp, as any consumer would. And man, it didn't make me feel better. Didn't make me feel better one bit. So my business side came out and I said, let me find the owner. And so the reason I'm sharing this story is I went through LinkedIn and found the owner, and his response was swift and fast. Once he got all the background information, the server was fired. We don't know if it was bias, discrimination, or whatever, but you could see if you put it together, you say the guy grew up in a city that's 2% African American. He probably doesn't have a lot of exposure to African Americans eating in his restaurant. So the leader of the restaurant, the owner, is like, I can't have this. I'm opening more restaurants. He's seeing the bigger picture of what that could do to impact him, and that's what we need leaders to do: is to understand the impact of lack of diversity or looking the other way when a situation arises to where you go, wait, well, if it wasn't bias, what was it? If it wasn't discrimination, what was it? And believe me, every white person on earth that I've told that story to has come up with every reason why it can't be bias. And you people have got to stop doing that. Stop. I have already spent hours thinking about the scenario. I don't need you to tell me, well, maybe they were really busy. We were the only ones there. So stop, okay? That's all I'm saying. As Camila is losing a gut laughing.
I mean, do you know how many times I have heard that? So many times, and it's things that are just ridiculous. They don't even make any sense. And they have a reason for it. And if you're thinking and you're educated and you're thinking logically and you're self-aware, you're going to realize that it makes no sense. And, you have to look at yourself as in that situation. So, man.
Bias controls all of our relationships and all of our thinking and everything that we do if we're not aware of our biases, especially those negative ones, right? So you have to be like, I know I have a bias. I don't like to deal with people who don't understand logic. Oh man, that's a bias of mine that I just can't. I'll load you up with all the facts in the world, but when you come to me with something stupid, it hurts me painfully.
No, that hurts me. I got a problem.
But it's, yeah. And that's, yeah.
You can't fix stupid, okay?
But we can fix your awareness, right, Dorothy?
But you can't fix intentional stupid.
Ooh.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Right. There's a big difference. Intentional stupid is absolute aggressive resistance to knowledge.
Oh. There's Dorothy again, giving those power statements.
Okay. Real different. Not knowing because of a lack of exposure says, whoa, I didn't know that. Now I see it. Now I got it. Wow. Chosen ignorance says, that didn't really happen. You saw it wrong. There was a good reason. Give me 2 minutes and I'll have 14 justifications. Let's look at this differently. You can't make me change my mind. Because if I have to change my mind, I have to start looking at my world differently. And I don't want to. So go away with your facts. Leave me here with what I know and don't bother me. So there really is chosen ignorance. And then there is lack of exposure or experience. Dramatically different. dramatically different.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think for somebody like myself, I long time ago gave up fighting people who told me something was impossible or told me this or that. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to waste an ounce of my energy on you. I'm going to walk around you and just keep right on going. Stay in your belief. I don't want to be bothered. But for those, and then there are people who love working with those people. God bless them. We're all here to do different work. For me, those who are ignorant or unprepared, unexpected, they don't know because they haven't ever been exposed to, those are the people I want to spend my life exposing them to a reality they never even knew was possible. Whether that's in terms of taking their vision for their business that's this big, I want to help them make it this big, or it's in race, it is in whatever issue where the ignorance is because of lack of exposure or because of small thinking, small energy fields, small concepts. Let me expose you to the reality that nothing is impossible if you truly want it. So let's take this, and how much further can we go? Let's look at this. You know, my optimism, because I'm just a born optimist. Not that I don't ever get discouraged or depressed, but I'm a born optimist. All right. Let's look at what happened now. We've just had 4 interviews or many interviews for VP of this country. I would pretty much guarantee that all of those women, Black women, white women that did not make it to the VP spot, let's wait and see what happens in February. My guess is there are going to be some really high positions in the government that these more than qualified Black and white women can handle and run with to bring this country where we're called to be.
That deserves applause.
So it can happen. It will happen in my optimistic self. Nowhere near as fast as I would like it to, but are we moving there? Is it happening? So to me, for myself, and I can only speak for me, my task is, and when you said, would you come on the show? You bet your butt. How many people can I expose to the reality? And if I have to use it, I'll use it. I'm Dr. Dorothy. If that impresses somebody, God bless their little souls.
Impressed us.
Them. Okay? So if that impresses you, go with it. I'm a born genius. Go with that. Okay?
Spelled Jen.
Then give credibility to that we have got to expose ourselves to worlds we know nothing about so we can see them from a completely different perspective than we have right now. And I think it's putting us, putting it out there for me is people have got to see when it comes to policing, when it comes to business, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're in the corporate world, when it comes to nonprofits, when it comes to faith. Back into a discussion I've been having with a friend of mine. At what point did white Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes show up? All right. Living in the Middle East. Okay. So let's do some reality checks on this. All right. And how do we do that? How do we do it? Only through exposure. How many people have said, I never thought about it? Well, let's think about it. 2,000 years ago, how many blonde hair, blue eyed people were traveling through Jerusalem? Okay. Right. And it's right. But then when you put it out there, some people are going to say, well, that's completely wrong. It happened to be that way. But the vast majority are going to say, whoa, I never thought about that. Okay, then let's do a reality check. And for some, if that little bit just shakes up the cement that's holding them stuck in place, we've begun a process of education based on exposure they never had. So to me, so many biases exist because nobody's ever challenged them.
I mean, if I pick up the good book and I'm reading the good book, it says so in the good book, what Jesus looked like. I mean, what?
He looked like John Legend in my mind.
Like that. You don't make mistakes.
So we're talking every arena. We're talking faith. We're talking business. We're talking arts. Camilla, we're talking arts. We're talking all of this.
We're talking banking.
Yes.
Right. We're talking all of it.
Yep.
Banking, housing. There's a whole arena. And I've said a lot recently, yes, policing is what's up front at the moment.
Right.
But do not for 1 second think that once policing has been dealt with, we're done.
Right. Right.
There is a whole, this just happens to be, sadly, what was put up front because of all the extremism that has been called out in the past 3 years, that it's just so out there, and with cell phones and cameras, and it's all up front now. None of this is new, but it's all up front so it can be dealt with. And once this is dealt with, we've got all those other areas we need to take a look at. And my hope is that ripple effect goes a whole lot faster. So the other arenas become faster and faster to deal with because the wave is going. This isn't a moment, it's a movement.
Yeah.
Well, look at the Me Too movement and the success thus far. So much more work to go, but at least we have that momentum underneath us around those issues. For our listeners, which we hope is a diverse group of individuals, and I say hope because here at Business RadioX, we don't tend to track listenership because it's all around the relationship that we're creating among the guests and putting that content out. For our listeners, and I'm going to speak to an executive leader, a professional, male or female. Dr. Dorothy, when someone comes to you, I don't know what kind of questions they ask, but I know when I've hired coaches before, both personally and professionally, I've come and said, I want to become more of an open canvas. I want to be a blank slate. I know there's some things I need to learn about myself and the world around me, and I want to get here in whatever I'm working on. How can you help me do that? Are those the same? Is that the same kind of mindset that people come to you? And I ask that because as our listeners are here with us, how do we help people become curious about themselves and about the topics that we're discussing as it relates to bias and its influence?
It really depends on the client I'm working with. Some come because they are stuck and the world made them stuck. And I help them see that maybe not. All right. Others come and one woman, head of a large medical division of a major hospital in the country, saw herself in one particular way as a very certain type of leader. And yet the more we spoke, the more I recognized she was an absolute visionary. Mm-hmm. Never realized she was a visionary because in medical model, you're trained to be exacting and so forth. And being a surgeon, even more so. But when she could begin to see that she was a visionary, it absolutely changed her entire sense of self, how she did her work, how she did her marriage, how she did her relationship with her kids. And she is very much involved in diversity in healthcare because of what goes on in healthcare.
That's a topic.
Right? And the lack of even middle-class Blacks, the lack of care or the lack of attention paid to the patient, much less dealing with what happens in the much poorer levels, those who don't have insurance, those who don't have an awareness of healthcare. All right, how do we bring effective healthcare to that population? So there's a whole world of diversity in healthcare. So that opens up a whole arena for me. And healthcare is really important to me in that we bring it to everybody on this country. We bring it to all peoples and that they all have the same opportunity for the same surgeons, the same hospitals, the same level of care, the same attention to detail without biases of things as ignorant and simplistic as Black women don't feel pain the same way white women do. Really? And who is it that told you that? All right. Or that people who live in the inner city, and I'm slightly biased because I come from the housing projects, people in the inner city really don't care about it as much. They live a different lifestyle.
Whatever.
Who told you that?
And why would that
I
ever
always
be
come back
believable?
to who told you that? Who told you that? And why would you hold on to that reality? Why is that filter so solidly in place for you?
So let's explore that for a second, because Karen said the same thing. Like the four of us would go, and sure, several of our listeners would be going like, how could you even possibly think that would be truth?
Right.
Because we're having those reinforcements, constant reinforcements through media, through our systemic structure, through our conversations. That's how it seems like somebody who would appear to be very smart otherwise and well-educated perhaps would think that legitimate. We have to challenge that.
Absolutely.
Well, when you learn how to think out of your box, and one of the things I do, you say as a coach, what I do as a coach, as a speaker, as whatever I do, let's not think out of the box. Let's just throw the damn box away.
Yep.
All right. Let's come way over here. Right. The box just makes you small. It makes your dream small, makes your vision small. It just destroys potential. So when we have an illusion, and because I've worked with this, as Camilla knows, for decades, all right, when we have one population that runs to the hospital the moment they cut themselves with something, looking for stitches, looking into antibiotics, looking for whatever they may need. There's a thought, well, whites are delicate because they feel pain so dramatically. Whereas, a Black woman won't show up unless she's close to dying. Well, could it be that she has been so conditioned to believe nobody will be there for her? Not because her pain level isn't there, but because there's been such a conditioning that says nobody cares.
Can I add some numbers to that? Because here's the
right
thing.
ahead.
Infant mortality in Washington State is one of these numbers that when I shared it with people, just literally jaws dropped. So infant mortality figures, these are from 2017. Infant is defined as under 1 year, and these are deaths per 1,000 live births. So white, non-Hispanic, the infant mortality rate is 3.48%. For Blacks or non-Hispanics, it's 10.23%. So the numbers are there. This is what, Dorothy, what you're saying about access to healthcare and resources when we talked about education, it's impacting the ability of African Americans to start on a level playing field from a health perspective. And because if your baby doesn't start off healthy, this is not new knowledge. This is why prenatal vitamins were created, is so we could have healthy beings on this earth that can live long, healthy lives, and we don't have to put them in hospitals and treat them medically. But yet African Americans are not afforded that same luxury. We have problems in this country.
Let's just talk about that word you just used, Karen. Is it a luxury?
It shouldn't be. Right? It shouldn't be a luxury.
My point.
Yeah.
My point. That's why I'm just bringing that word up.
Yep.
You said they're not afforded that luxury. It should not be a luxury.
It should not
be a standard given that this is the care you receive when you are pregnant. This is the care your baby receives from the moment we recognize it exists. This is what we do with all women, with all babies. And this is just a given. That we need to get rid of healthcare as being a luxury.
I'm going to say this because I went through breast cancer. And when I went to deal with this process, I had a male doctor tell me, I asked him, I said, I need to get an MRI done. Why do you need to get an MRI done? He said. I said, well, I would like to have a baseline, in case it comes back, right? I want to see what that looks like. He argued with me.
Oh, my goodness.
And then he said, well, maybe your insurance won't pay for it. I said, I don't care whether my insurance pays for it or not. I said, I will pay for it. And he rolled his eyes.
Oh.
And I just sat there for a moment and I took a breath.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, we're going to do this anyway. And so I got it done. Here's the problem with that. I got it done. I was due to have surgery in August of 2017. The MRI had not been read prior to that surgery. And I'm going to say this why, because when I went in, he said, oh, thank God we did this MRI. Thank God we did this MRI. Because I not only had one tumor, I had two. And had they not done it, they would have opened me up. And heaven knows what would have been. And this is why I'm saying healthcare is so important. Advocating for yourself, having a male doctor tell you that you don't know what you're talking about.
Bias.
And that's when I realized that I truly needed to look at all avenues of this. And so that is my story.
And it's a common story. I was having this conversation yesterday with a colleague of mine who hopefully will back us as a sponsor. But we were having just a general conversation, catching up because he had just gone through COVID. So he and his family, and truthfully, they weren't doing what they were doing, should have been doing, or things might have been different. But long story short, we were having this conversation about his mom and his dad, and the dad could get the care. I can't remember exactly what happened, but the long story of it is I pointed out to him, the reason they didn't keep the dad for very long in the hospital is because they triaged him, because that was occurring in our heavy point in June when we had very little hospital bed space. And so I'm having this conversation with him and he's arguing up and down. I'm like, buddy, I said, this is why I can't get sick. I'm African American. I have no health insurance. And at the time, what you were talking about, they're looking at who's most likely to survive or to be treatable. And that's a concern as a person of color, is that bias dictates the health care we get, regardless of whether we have insurance or not. I mean, and that's what Camila's story is telling us right now.
I mean, do we, when we look at that, I have to say, I can't put this in a black or white right now, because if a white woman was in that position, would she have gotten the same treatment, or would she have gotten, that MRI?
But that's always the question. That's the reason why racism is so hard to pinpoint, because we always want to point to everything else but racism or bias when it comes to a discriminatory act. And we just got to stop doing that.
I mean, it's so important that we look at all sides of that. And so, but I have to ask that question.
It's a legitimate question to ask. There are two pieces there. One, you're a woman with a male doctor.
Yeah.
That's one question. You're a black woman with a white male doctor. That's another point. All right. You clearly are highly intelligent and educated. So let's look at what is going on. You are not, and I try to put myself in somebody else's head, and it's hard to do, but in his head, what is he seeing? What is he dealing with? What are his biases? What is his need to have a patient insist on effective medical care? What ego state is he coming from? What biases is he coming from? That there is a patient who's got to be so powerful, and I think we all do, unfortunately, but especially Black women. We have to be so powerful to insist that we get the care needed, because we're the only ones that truly know our body. That's across the board. And why isn't this about supporting us rather than needing to fight for what you deserve? The stress you are under, period, in those conditions should make somebody extraordinarily more compassionate and understanding.
My father had just died the previous month. Okay. The day I was officially diagnosed is the day my father died. Okay. So I not only had to deal with what, my father's passing.
Grief.
Okay. I didn't even have time to grieve. And so I was getting biopsies while I was going to take care of him. My sister came and helped me out. She sat there with him while I went and got a biopsy. My good college friend came from Florida to help me. She helped me advocate. I mean, God love her, because if I didn't have this woman who had stage 4 breast cancer come and advocate with me, I honestly don't know what the avenue would have looked like. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, God.
I think we're also speaking to the bias. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Camilla.
I'm just saying that there's so many avenues here. There's so many points. You know what I'm saying? But why do we as women, and even as Black women, have to advocate that hard to get the same care that everybody else is getting?
And it shows you. I mean, we started out with Karen talking about policing and the issues, but it shows you that we are talking healthcare. We're talking education. We're talking the SATs. We're talking, there's too many issues to discuss in a 1-hour show. but we need to start somewhere. And this is about bias. And just looking at with Camilla, how bias impacted that for you. How Karen, with you just wanting to get something to eat. How all of these things, biases that get thrown at us. And to pretend there isn't a bias there is go back into chosen ignorance. All right?
Yeah.
So when we're dealing with biases and we own it, the piece is, how can we, as powerful influencers, as powerful people, and in this group here, as powerful women, keep standing up and shifting and changing, one, recognizing the biases exist, then pointing them out, because I truly believe some don't even see it as a bias. They accept ignorance as fact. And so it's really about education, that is a bias, that is not a fact. And I'm not going to settle in my personal life with those I care about or those I can influence, have influence for, dealing with somebody's bias and just letting it go. You don't have the right to have bias when you're out here working with other people.
Ooh,
when you're in business, you don't have the right to bias. You just don't have the right to have bias if you're having a business.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this radio show, is that there's so much to be discussed. I mean, from just education to medical to healthcare to, policing, all of to what's happening to our children, domestic violence. I mean, we could go on and on. And so the reason we brought this radio show together is so that we could have these kind of conversations. It's going to take a lot of conversations. This is not going to be cured overnight. And so what we're really looking for is we're looking for some sponsors to help us continue this conversation. So if you are at all interested in being part of the change and really exposing bias and racism and those kind of things, please email me at Karen@nomosbrands.com, or you can email Karen Nowicki or any of us, as a matter of fact. We've got a couple more shows that are set for us, but we definitely want to continue to do these shows through the end of the year. So we're looking for premier sponsors and a variety of other sponsors to help us do that. So hopefully you will want to join us in that.
The other thing I'd add to that is, and we've said this every time we've been on air together, as you're listening, we'd love to hear what's showing up for you, right? What other topics should we consider bringing into this conversation? What have you learned as a result of listening to this style of a podcast and radio show where we're just shooting the breeze and speaking from our heart? There's, a few statistics and a few things that we know we're going to say, but beyond that, we're just coming together as a unified group to discuss what's showing up, and then bringing on experts like Dr. Dorothy to help guide us in this conversation. So we'd love to hear from you so that this conversation can continue, and we know if we're moving in the right direction, because we'll have some examples of how people have begun to shift in their thinking and their behavior. We have just about 10 minutes left in this segment, and I want each of you to kind of reflect on, prior to coming on air today and knowing that our topic was around bias and the influence it has, is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you thought, this would be important to mention, or even something that's shown up as a result of something anybody here has shared on the panel, so that we can bring this conversation around? And then we'll end with kind of an action call, a call to action. And I'm looking to Dorothy specifically, but Karen and Camilla as well. What can we invite people to do next as a result of sharing in this listening experience with us? So I know that's a mouthful. What else would you like to share that we haven't hit on today? Maybe some resources that you could share, in addition to a call to action from your perspective for this conversation. And Karen, do you mind maybe tipping it off for us?
So I'm a big book reader. And literally reader. I do better when that information, I visually see it versus when I hear it. So I tried to do some audio while I was on the road to Spokane, and I found that it put me to sleep. But the book that I'm reading right now, which is fantastic, and I think I finally got her name right, Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt out of Stanford. She wrote a book that is called Bias. It's super easy to read. I'm a couple chapters into it, and it really does detail out a lot of the case studies that have been done regarding policing and other things. It's fascinating. A lot of it is on the neurology of our brain and how our brain categorizes things. That's what it's supposed to do. It's a Dewey Decimal System. And when I say it's a Dewey Decimal System, I mean it's not much better than a Dewey Decimal System. So what happens is that these biases are created, and they create rules like Dr. Dorothy is talking about. And that is where we have to look at, why do we have these rules? And so I really highly recommend that book. That book talks some amazing things about how we look at how we recognize faces, and how babies are better at recognizing faces of their own race. And we're talking babies than they are at somebody else's race, and how difficult it is for one race to be able to pinpoint facial features on somebody that they don't know, like if they were robbed or mugged or something of that nature, that, it's not just the idea that all Blacks look alike. It's part of our neurology. And there's a lot of studies that are talked about in this book that if you're a logic science person like I am, you'll really appreciate that. So that would be my recommendation to you.
Love it. Camilla or Dorothy? And then we'll circle back around for action.
I'm going to be quick. Some of the things that I do as being me is when I meditate, I will sit and I will ask myself a question, and I will let whatever comes into my head filter down to a piece of paper. I am asking every person to just sit. Give yourself 5-10 minutes just to sit down and say, what biases do I have? And when you're sitting and you're meditating, you will realize your brain will start meditating and working, and you'll start writing down all of these things, and just write down whatever comes. And look at the pattern that you will see when you do the exercise. Mm-hmm. It's powerful.
And I think to expand on that, Camilla, is what belief systems do I have? And if I can write my belief systems down, and then I review them, how many of those are my bias? Because frequently our biases are belief systems. Bias carries, in some people's minds, a negative judgment call. So let's write down your belief systems about people, your belief systems about yourself, your belief systems about life, your belief system about the world. Then as you do that, just take one whole sheet of paper, because we could do 12 sheets of paper. Just take one sheet of paper on one side and write down what's going to come up are your primary belief systems. And then look at those. How many of those have implicit bias within them? And are you open to shifting a belief system that may not even be yours? It may be something you learned as a child that you truly don't even practice anymore, but you hold on to simply because it connects you to family, it connects you to your heritage, whatever the case may be. Let's do that. One bias I own and I don't want to get rid of is I truly believe we all came here with a spiritual purpose, and with the purpose to make ourselves and the world a better place. And if we are here to make ourselves and the world a better place, each one of us has to look at, in what way am I called to impact and influence this world? And right now, for many of us, racism is up. Whether our propensity is to deal with it in healthcare, to deal with it with the police, to deal with it in business, whatever in the arts, whatever it may be. If you're called to a specific lane, go into that lane. If you're not called to go in a lane and you're just dealing with racism as you see it, the willingness to be open to seeing it, the willingness to be open to stand up in the face of it. Are you willing to call it out when you see it? Oh, I wasn't. I was just kidding. Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Excuse me. You just perpetuated a belief system, whether it was theoretically in humor or not. Notice what you just said. When you put something out there energetically, you're putting it out there. Let's be conscious of what we speak. Let's be conscious of what we think. And it's okay if a bias pops up in your mind. We're a product of conditioning. But recognize it when it's in your mind. Am I going to act from that? Or am I not going to act from that? All right? Is this a bias that came before from my lack of knowledge, and my knowledge now defies that? Where am I coming? And if we continuously look at that, we have the option to break free. And I think all of us are searching for freedom. But that's freedom from our own self-imposed limitations, as well as freedom from the limitations others place on us.
Our own birdcage.
Far more, I truly believe this, we have far more self-created limitations than we have limitations placed on us by others. Because we make ourselves so small. We make ourselves so limited. And I'm not for a moment saying that life isn't about confronting the challenges and walking around many of them. But when it's something within me, I don't want to walk around it. I want to deal with it. I want to confront it, and I want to get rid of it. And that willingness to not be wrong or right, to just be misguided. Because the moment we have to make a misguided thought wrong, we start defending it. We start justifying it. So don't make it wrong. Make it a product of ignorance or a product of unknowing, a product of lack of exposure, and grow with it. So giving up the judgment, but acknowledging the tendency. And then you have the option to act differently. And enough acting differently, before you realize it, you're thinking differently. You're believing differently. You're walking on this earth differently. And if it has to start with your actions, start with your actions. But if we're all called to make this world a better place, let's start with what's put in front of us. And what's in front of us right now, not just on this show, but what's in front of us right now is racism, the power of that ignorance, the destructiveness of that ignorance. Because I truly believe racism is solely a product of ignorance. If you truly met somebody and knew their soul, how could you not love who they are?
Amen.
So much.
I'm speechless.
I want one of those pregnant pauses where we just sit for a bit and indulge in that. And go ahead, Camilla.
I said, I love you, girl, because you just keep it real and you just, that's all I got to say.
I love it. I'm thinking of my 13-year-old son and the accountability that we have between each other. I'll see a behavior that is mimicking something he's seen on TV or TikTok or YouTube or from within our family and our community. And when it's out of integrity for who I know he is as a soulful human being, I call him on it. And it's uncomfortable for him and for both of us. And he'll do a lot of jockeying around and not take ownership for it. But guess what I'm blessed with? He does that to me as well.
Yeah.
And there are many times I have to just swallow, listen, and go, wow, you're right. I do it too. And thank you for pointing it out. Sometimes I'll defend because I'm the parent, and I'll walk away a couple hours later, and that's when it hits me. And I still take the responsibility to come back and say, hey, we had that conversation, and you were telling me that I had, whatever, I did this and that, and that I've scolded you for that. I need to apologize because I've done the same thing, and it took me a little while to see where I was coming from. And I've never introduced the word bias to him before, but I'm looking forward to doing that after today's conversation. We are out of time, so I'm going to do what Karen had done just a bit ago and encourage you to help us keep these on-air conversations on racism and the impact on small business and the arts going. We're looking for a premier sponsor and a handful of show sponsors. Sponsors will receive on-air mentions, as well as a variety of promotional opportunities before, during, and after each show. And if you are a business who would like to support positive change, please do contact Karen, Karen, at nomossbrands.com. That's NOM as in monkey, OSS, B as in boy, RANDS.com for more information. Dr. Dorothy, Karen mentioned how folks could get in touch with you through Ask Dr. Dorothy. I believe that's a Facebook page.
Right.
Yeah.
The page is my website, askdrdorothy.com.
As well. Yeah. And 8 books, I think you said you've authored 8 books.
Yeah.
Just 8.
Yeah.
So, and I know we can find you on LinkedIn because I connected with you there. Just so appreciative and honored to have you today. And Camilla, thank you so much for the recommendation that we bring your friend Dorothy on to share this time together.
It was awesome. Thank you so much. It's just been a great experience.
Yeah. It always is with you, girl.
And Karen Loomis, again, thank you for the idea, planting the seed to saying that this conversation needs to happen and trusting me and Business RadioX with the opportunity. You've been listening to Phoenix Business RadioX, broadcasting live from within Mac 6 Conscious Workspace. Some media leans left, some lean right, and we lean business. Until next time, I'm Karen Nowicki. Thanks again for listening.